Well, good morning again. Again, glad you're here with us, able to witness our baptism of Mac. How many people got a picture of Mac? I know some people got pictures. Anybody get video? Okay, some video too. They say a picture's worth how many words? 1,000. So how many words would a feature-length film be? You think about that? Remember, we used to look at photo albums that we would print out pictures, and you'd put them in a shoebox for about 8 years, and eventually you'd get them into an album. And then we started to be able to take videos very easily, and now they're somewhere floating around on a cloud, and you're able to access those, and we've become a video culture instead of a picture culture. Used to, when you'd put something together, you would hopefully, it's like, I wish the directions had pictures. And now you just go online and find a video of someone else doing it and saying it. And it's just the way we've shifted. I've shifted too. I like the video. That's why most of us would rather watch a movie rather than just look at pictures. You look at a picture and you've got a lot of unanswered questions. What was going on here? How did all this come about? And a movie, a film, allows you to be part of a different world. I'm a fan of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and so there's the Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings, and there's all these amazing worlds that are created. And there's a different set of rules, and you learn the way different things work. And you fall in love with the characters. Maybe you like sci-fi or fantasy or even old westerns. The kids that play all the video games, it's not so much, you look at it, it doesn't look like fun at all. They're just pressing buttons with their thumbs. It's like, that looks really boring. But what it is, it's actually they are engaging in a story, and they're able to become a character, and they have a different goal and different things that are going on all the time. So that's the allurement. It's a whole world that is created that has its own explanatory power. And this morning, as we've been going through and looking at Jesus as King, which is our theme of the book of Matthew that we've been going through, we've come to chapter 13 and the first 23 verses, known as the parable of the sower. It's our first parable in the gospel. And I send out, again, if you don't get our little text message updates, you have a connection card. You can fill that out and put it back there on the table as you leave, and we'll make sure you get those updates. But I sent out something saying that we're looking at the parable. Jesus spoke in parable constantly. For 3 years, he taught everything in parables. But this time, he speaks in the parable. And so on the back, you have some blanks that can be filled out. And it says, this is the parable because it is all-encompassing. The parable of the sower covers everything. Most of Jesus' parables make one point. Later on, as the Pharisees are coming against him, he'll give his longest parable. And this long parable he gives, 1 point, one principle. Most of his parables are little snapshots. They're pictures of how the spiritual life works. The reason it's so important to know this parable clearly, inside and out, is because this is the full-length feature movie film parable. In this parable, we will see everything. How God works, the angels, people, the Word, the Father, how spiritual growth happens, what are your internal spiritual resources and your internal spiritual hindrances, how does the world act upon you, how does spiritual forces, positive and negative, act upon you, what is the condition of your heart. The whole world spiritually is in this parable. As a matter of fact, not in this version that we'll read in Matthew, but when Mark tells this parable, the disciples are confused, as they typically are. And Jesus says, you all don't understand this parable? He said, well, if you don't know this one, you won't understand any of them. And so Jesus sets this up as the parable. So only Jesus can take a story. Parable is just a story that's thrown alongside a spiritual truth for illustration. Only Jesus can use a few verses about farming and explain the entire spiritual life. So that's why it's so important for us to dig into it. And again, Jesus is living in an agricultural society, so they would have all gotten this. Where our farming and agriculture works a little bit different today, but we'll flesh those out. So we'll read this together. Again, this is Matthew 13, first 23 verses, parable of the sower, or sometimes called the parable of the soils, because it's about the different soils. That same day, Jesus has been teaching already. He says, that same day, Jesus went out of the house and he sat by the lake. Such a large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. He told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. And so whoever has ears, let them hear. So that's the parable, and then he goes into quoting Isaiah here to talk about the people who were receiving the parable. He says, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? And he replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. And so before we read the explanation of the parable, he's talking about these people going way back in the time of Isaiah. The history is God gives his word to his people, a covenant for them to follow, and they're okay for a while. And then they fall away, and they're distracted, and they have hard hearts, and they go after other gods from other nations. And then a prophet comes along and says, hey, the prophet typically wasn't telling them the future. The prophet was usually reminding them of the promises they made in the past, to be observant of the covenant, the love relationship covenant that God had given them. And so Jesus is going back and quoting Isaiah and said, a parable has to be entered into by faith. So the understanding that they're talking about here isn't that they logically don't get it. It's that their hearts are hardened. They've turned themselves off to receiving it. And so Jesus uses these parables. And if you enter the parable by faith, which is the only way a parable can truly be entered into and understand, then you're good. If not, your heart is hard. So then he explains the parable. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away that which was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. And so Jesus tells the story that we think is about this farmer, and then he says, if you don't have a receptive heart to understand not just what the parable is saying, but you see what Jesus does is he makes us part of the parable. Every one of us in here are in that story. It's inescapable. You can reject it. You can try not to believe it, but you're in it. Every one of us are in the parable. We're part of the world of the kingdom that he's created. And so we'll look here at what is the warning that Jesus is giving. What are the resources that he's given to live in this kingdom? So this is Jesus as king, and he's just laid out the whole universe of how his kingdom operates by sitting in a boat watching probably a guy up on the hill behind the crowd throwing seed. So first off, you need to know that the agriculture of that day, you're essentially in a desert. And if you think it's hard to grow crops in Indiana clay, it's much harder in a dry, arid, sandy desert. And people have paths that they walk along, and there's no plowing, really. There's not much tilling. They have seed, and they do what is called broadcasting. So we use that term in media, right? A broadcast, something that's over the airways. Back when people watched TV, it would be on a channel, and you'd turn and you'd see a broadcast. Well, that's an agricultural term where the sower would walk and he'd have a big leather sack of seed, and he would just scatter it along where he walked on his property. And he's hoping that something's going to grow from this seed. There's no special technology he has, and he's just hoping that some will take root. And Jesus, observant, knowing that everyone knows how this works, will use this in order to explain the spiritual life. And the sower and the seed, that next line there, is the same for all. The question is, are you good dirt or fertile soil, if that sounds more cleaner for you? But we're talking about dirt. It can't really be that clean. Notice Jesus could have said, well, in his left pocket, he has wheat seed. And on this, he has barley. And over this, he has some high-yield alfalfa or whatever. The seed's the same because the seed is the Word. And the Word is the same for everyone. Right? There's not one Bible for you and one Bible for me. There's not a set of rules for you. We all start out with the Word. And so this is the picture of the sower, of Jesus himself and his followers broadcasting the truth, the Word. It's the same for everyone. It's not that the Word doesn't work in your life. It's that your life doesn't work with the Word. You see, there's a big difference in how we see that. Well, the Bible doesn't apply to me. Yeah, it applies. But there's something about you as soil that is not going to receive it. And so Jesus puts all his cards out on the table and says everyone is going to be under one of these soils. As you imagine, if you've planted a garden, the first thing you're supposed to do is break up the ground so it can receive, till it up. There's no tillers here with this guy. Again, this guy's just throwing seed. Maybe the way you might plant a little grass seed in your yard, where you just kind of throw it out. Maybe you rake it in a little bit. But the guy walks the path. It's the same path that the sheep and the goats and the camels and the donkeys that walk, and he's walking along his path. And as he's throwing, some is going to set on the path. And the path is the hardest part of the ground because it's always being walked on. So the seed doesn't go. Even though it says that it was sown in their hearts, it's not going to take root at all. Because he says the birds of the air will come and eat it. And in the explanation of the parable, that means that Satan has come and eaten it away. It wasn't that the word wasn't any good. It was simply that the heart was hard. Hard ground. Hard heart. It's the same idea. Hard heart. And so the person who is angry, the person who is prideful, whatever attitude looks like a hard heart, the person who ignores, the person who's narcissistic, all those things are this kind of soil here. There's no germination. Like there's people that can sit under teaching or preaching or in Bible studies and unchanged. It's like, well, it just didn't work for me. Well, no, it's that your heart is hard. From the warning that God gave Cain in the Garden of Eden all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, that's the number one problem that people have, is the hard heart. And so that's why it's the first warning. Nothing else matters. He doesn't have a long story about this one. You wouldn't take it. They just wouldn't take it. It's amazing when you see, and this happens in some of your own life, where it's like you remember having a hard heart. Maybe it was last year, maybe it was 20 years ago when, how many times did you hear the gospel, or were you in church or part of a Bible study, or did someone talk to you about God to where you had no interest? As a matter of fact, you had negative interest. More than that, you didn't like the person because they were talking about it. We all, I believe, start out as hard soil. And I think that the Spirit has to work, sometimes through the prayers of others, sometimes through a crisis that happens in your life, to soften that up, just to where the Word can get in. You want to go to a Bible study? No. Hard heart. No, that's just not my thing. Well, Jesus here, again, everyone who's ever lived is in this parable. There are no exceptions. So that's the first warning, the hard heart. And there's a nice little illustration to put them all together along the footpath. And again, it's not that they can't figure it out. There's parts of the Bible you don't know what they mean exactly. There's plenty of parts that I don't understand. But this is not talking about that kind of understanding. This is the rejection. And he quotes the passage in Isaiah saying, if they would just receive with their hearts, if they would open their spiritual eyes and spiritual ears, I would come in and heal them. But he does not because of the hardness of heart. So that next line there, the hard heart leaves the word open to be taken away. It's just not there. So he goes on. That's not the only kind of soil. Some people are very hard, and that would represent, again, many of the people he was encountering. But at the same time, Jesus, the reason he's teaching in a boat is because the crowds are so big, and he's healed so many people, that he had the disciples get a small boat so he could stand in the water to keep the people from crushing him. So they're there to hear him. It's standing room only. I mean, he had to get in the water just to keep from being crushed. So there's plenty of people there, and they're like, okay, we got that, but that's not us. We're okay. Hard heart, check. My heart is receptive. I'm here. I'm ready to learn. I'm open to change. And so he continues with this rocky soil. If you've, again, ever done any gardening, and you start to till and all you find is rocks, that's a challenge. I remember picking up rocks in 5-gallon buckets and trying to carry them off so that roots would have somewhere to grow. And so he said there's this rocky soil. It grows up quickly because there's rock, and especially there. This came up, I don't know how, in a trivia question the other day, but the area that Jesus is in here is known for its limestone, just like between here and Bedford, Indiana. Between here and Bedford, Indiana, and right there where Jesus is are the two world main producers of limestone. And so if you go far enough, you just hit rock. And so there's big rock and there's little rock, and as you can imagine, what happened when someone broke the law, what was their method of execution for the Jews? They stoned them. Why? Because there's rocks everywhere. You can always stone somebody. They're everywhere. And that makes it hard to plant. But it's not that it doesn't go in. It's not the same as the hard heart. It starts to sprout, and it sprouts quickly. It's promising. It's the first thing you see pop up out of the ground, because there's only that much dirt. And so there's, genetic material, hormones, etc., in the plant that is wanting to grow, and it's going to burst forth. as a seedling, even with a little bit of dirt. And if you have sidewalk, you've seen that happen. You ever have to weed eat that little wedge between your driveway if you've got any concrete? It's like, why can't I grow a garden, but on the driveway there's weeds in every little seam? It just takes a little bit. Now, if you start getting trees grow out, you've got a different problem. Typically, you just get, crabgrass just needs a little bit. Just a little bit of sand, a little bit of moisture, and it's going to grow. And he said, this grows up quickly because it has no root. And when the sun comes out, it's going to be scorched. And it's not going to produce anything. It's the first one to look nice. It's the first seed to germinate. But it's also the first seed to be scorched by the sun and die away. And the explanation, people who hear the word and they receive it with joy. But as soon as any trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Why? Because they have no root. And so they're the ones that are in the rocks. And it happens all the time. The rocky soil are those driven by hype. They do not persevere. Unfortunately, our faith, there's a lot of hype in maybe cultural Christianity, United States. A lot of false promises, a lot of hoopla, or whatever extravaganza, whatever word you want to use to say, whether it's in personality cults or popular music or books or whatever it is. There's just a lot of hype. I want to seem spiritual. I want the amazing kind of miraculous excitement and that warm, fuzzy feeling. But as soon as persecution comes because of the word, and it was going to come on, we see what happens to Jesus and the 12. Remember, they all just kind of scattered anytime persecution came. And the early church, you knew who was in and who was out. Because when persecution comes, all those who are on the fence, they bail. It's like persecution really determines, trouble really determines who is authentically planted versus who's just there to see a show. Who's just there for the initial excitement. And so you'll have, churches will do things and it goes on. This has always been this way. It's like everyone shows up for that, but who shows up for, who perseveres, who sticks it out when difficulty happens, when challenges come, who still can say like Job, though he slay me, I will trust in him. Who can say that? Well, Job said it. The disciples would eventually say it. And if you've been a believer for a while and trouble and persecution comes, which it will. It comes for everyone. But Jesus specifically says this is trouble and persecution that comes because of the word. It's not just that bad things have happened to you. You're sick or you got financial problems. This is because of your faith that you thought would bring maybe an easy life. My faith itself has brought new challenges. I now have to deal with things I wasn't going to deal with. I have to stop certain things that I was enjoying, or I have to start doing some things that don't sound fun. I might be ostracized by this group or that group. That's those hype-driven. They're not actually for real. They're just there. And they wilt away, and you don't see them. So as we look at the church growing in Africa and South America and parts of Asia in cultures that are very hostile, it's like they don't have much of a trouble, telling who's who because, there's a cost to it. And so this is the cost. Well, he continues. It's not the last kind of the soil. There's another one. And that's the soil with the thorns. Now, the thorns represent something that is also growing next to you. The thorns will choke your faith, either because you worry or are distracted. They believe. Maybe they've made it through some challenging times. But the worries of this life, or he says the deceitfulness of wealth. Now, in most of his other parables, he used like the pearl of great price or the buried treasure. He talks about wealth being a good, like the gospel or the kingdom is something good that you go after, like buried treasure, like a pearl. But here, he warns the deceitfulness of wealth. Now, that means possibly that you have a lot of wealth, like the rich young ruler who came to him and said he would follow him. And then Jesus said, sell everything. And it says the man went away sad because he had great wealth. His wealth had cheated him out of the kingdom because of the type of soil he was. He was the soil among the thorns. Others, it could be the deceit. You could be broke and say, you know, if I only had wealth, my life would work out well. So this isn't an indictment against people who have money. It's about the deceitfulness of wealth, whether you've got it or you don't. It becomes the distraction from the kingdom because of the wealth. And so the thorns will choke your faith because money lies. Money isn't neutral. The wealth affects you, good or bad. And it's interesting that he throws that in there because most of the people he's talking to don't have money. And so this isn't an indictment against people who have some money. It's hey, if you're living your whole life just making excuses or putting off what you should do because someday your ship will come in financially, you're distracted from the kingdom. The kingdom's going to go forth regardless of a price tag, regardless of what you have or don't have. That the kingdom's not really about that. And so make sure that you're not distracted. And so because the money will lie to you. Money isn't neutral. You can do good with it, you can do bad with it, but it's not neutral. It affects you either way. In some way, it affects you. It makes the priority, the decision-making process, what you procrastinate with doing, what you jump into, it affects your mood. And so it's not good nor bad in and of itself, but it isn't neutral. And so he warns from that, the deceitfulness of wealth. And so we saw Satan can come in and take the word from the hard heart. Your lack of depth can make the word ineffective, and now it can be that thorn growing right next to you. And as you look around, there's thorns everywhere in your life. And they're always crouching in. If you enjoy hiking through the woods, like I do, that's the number one problem with hiking through the woods, is that there's thorn bushes. And they've got these little leaders that come off and connect to every other thing that's growing. And they'll wrap around that little sapling, that tree, and they'll end up choking it out and killing it. You know, all this stuff works in the real world. That's why the picture is so powerful. And I remember being young, going into the woods with a knife and making a path. And I'm just going to cut all these thorns out up high, you know, where I can walk through. And then you go back in and you look, everywhere I cut sprang 2 more branches. I wasn't killing them, I was just pruning them to make them grow more. And so there's this thing where you really, it's strategic how you have to manage the thorns in your life. You can't prune them up high. You can't just basically kind of time management them out. You can't ignore them away. This is still a heart issue. It's like if my heart is really in tune and really fertile soil, the thorns can be doing whatever they want. I'm going to be okay. No matter what kind of craziness is going on over here with this thorn in our political world, this thorn over here, the deceitfulness of wealth, these thorns back here of this relationship or what's going on at work or at school, I'm really focused downward, okay? My faith is rooting deep. I'm not trying to branch out and grow in every other area where there's thorns. I'm just taking care of the kingdom in my life and where God has put me. God has put you right in that spot to go deep and to bloom and to bear fruit. And the thorns will choke you away because they will distract you. They're pretty scary to look at, aren't they? You see a big bramble bush, you know, that's where the rabbits and stuff hide because nothing else wants to go in there. and you see people in their life completely spiraling out of control, a lot of that is, well, they're over there in the thorn bushes. They're distracted with everything else in the world. They're trying to build their own kingdom in the middle of the thorn bushes. Hopefully, we are growing deep with roots in order to grow straight up in godliness with each other as a church so that the thorns are not the issue. They won't go away. They'll never go away, but being deep-rooted, reminding ourselves of the goal that God has called us to, of all the disciplines of life that He's given us opportunity to pursue in order to be deep-rooted. And that's what takes His next one, the good soil. Our mission is to multiply by deep-rooted faith in Him. Good soil. It sounds pretty simple. It's like all you need is good soil. Well, the soil has to stay good. It has to be deep. And now the roots can grow in every direction. They can keep being fed by the rain. The rain comes on all the soils, but only in the deep, good soil will the kingdom be first in your life. And then something happens. He says, that soil will produce a crop, 30, 60, or 100-fold, which is, in every parable of Jesus, there's some outlandish, crazy statement. And this is it for this parable. If you've ever gotten to your home and someone, you can live in certain areas and you can worry that someone might steal something off your porch. We've never had that problem. We'll get home and someone has donated something on our porch. And depending upon the time of year will depend upon what it is and how good the season is. And so sometimes it'll be bags of zucchini. Why? Because everybody's had their fill of zucchini by now. It was a really good year, zucchini, and they'll eat it, Or maybe one year it was tomatoes. It was just a good year. And so they say whenever there's a really good crop, whenever the farmers are just beaming and produce drops real low because there's such a great supply, they say that's 6 yield. 6 yield is like we've got truckloads of this stuff we don't know what to do with. And so Jesus says, if you're rooted with me, seeing the kingdom, not in rocky soil where you're just going to fall away, not with a hard heart, not being distracted by all the thorns around you, you're looking at 30, 60, 100. That's supernatural. That doesn't even make sense. The farmers were just laughing at that. 30, 60, 100. Best yield we've ever had in this area is probably 3. 3 yield is just an amazing blessing from God. And he's saying, well, this is how the kingdom works. It's similar to the same parable that he'll tell soon of the mustard seed. It's a little bitty thing, but it just explodes. And so that's how the kingdom works. And so like we look at it and it's like, wow, what could my life be like? How could I be yielding for God? How could my life be yielding fruit that He would bless us with if we're just good dirt? Just that simple. It's not that you go out and get another degree or a different job. It's not that you do all these amazing things, because you always end up in the thorns trying everything else. You always end up distracting. You think the latest, greatest something else is going to come to your life and it's just one day my ship will come in and things are just going to blow up. It's like, no, Jesus thousands of years ago said, if you can just be rooted in my gospel and block out all the distractions, if you can keep your heart soft, pliable, open to my word, to my calling, you will grow. Something else about this growth is it takes a while. And sometimes it's not the season yet. It's like your season of producing might not be it. You know, how long was that seed put in good soil before you've got that on the kitchen table? 3-4 months? The life cycle of the plant, that might be a lot longer for you. But it'll come. And it won't come from the thorns. It won't come from a hard heart. And it won't come from the rocks. They won't come from the flash, the hype. And so as we come to our conclusion today, as we consider, this simple little farming illustration from Jesus and how that really affects our spiritual life, this is something to really do an analysis on. Because you're in this parable. You're one of the characters in it. All of us. This isn't just some story Jesus tells and we can kind of consider it. The ancient Greeks, they would tell little stories and parables and metaphors, and we would tell stories to our kids growing up, little moral lessons. This isn't a moral lesson story. This is a story where you're in it and you have a role to play. And your role to play is to be open to receiving the blessings of the Spirit that He's ready to bestow on you. So we'd love to receive you this morning. If you'd like to pray about being good soil, if you'd like to have help in your life with that, we can pray with you up here. We can set up times to do ministry and to get together. If you'd like to pray with someone at your seat as we sing this last song. But don't let this skip through your mind, because as soon as we finish the last song, what happens? You go out, and we're surrounded by thorns. Every direction. Most of your thorns happen on Monday morning. Some will happen in the car, on the way home. So it's like, this is the parable. This is what I constantly remind myself of as I think, how does this whole universe operate? What is God doing? It's here. There's a lot of other wonderful parables, but you can always find kind of an explanation, an illustration of what am I supposed to do? How do I keep going? What do I need to focus on? This could be a parable you have in your mind, deep in your soul, so that you can be deep in Him. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the simplicity of your word, that regardless of our past or our future that we don't know, that you have called us to the simplicity of being deep-rooted in you. Means that we're open. Means that we haven't figured it all out, but we know that you have. We thank you for the warnings here, knowing that if our heart is hard, we'll miss out on everything. Knowing that if we're too easily excited about the new things and the quick things and the fast things, that we will numb ourselves to the true things and the deep things and the real things. I pray not that you would take the thorns away from us, but that you would make us deeper in order to stay firmly planted and rooted in you. And we look forward to one day the harvest. Some of us will experience blessings and harvest in this life, and some of us won't. That harvest when we come and you take us to be with you. So we just thank you that your Spirit will continue to work as we sing this last song, as you will point out, where am I? How do I get deeply rooted? What thorn is robbing me of opportunity and spiritual joy? And so we just thank you for your constant Spirit that's our companion and teacher. And it's the name of Jesus, the one who has sown the word in our hearts, the one who has given us the Spirit to grow, the one who has given us His word to live by, and the one who will harvest us one day to be with Him. It's in His great name we pray. Amen.